America is $36 trillion in debt. Japan owes over $10 trillion. Add it all up, and the world is sitting on over $250 trillion in debt, more than twice the value of everything the global economy produces in a year. But here's the question. If every country is borrowing, who are they borrowing from? Countries hold each other's bonds. Banks lend to foreign governments. Pension funds buy debt from other nations. It's a closed loop. Money flows in circles, from debtor to creditor and back again, which means the debt isn't owed to some external power. It's owed to the system itself. We're told this is a crisis, a failure of fiscal responsibility, a ticking time bomb that will eventually explode. But that's the first lie. The debt isn't a bug in the system. The debt is the system. It's not a mistake that needs fixing. It's the foundation of how modern money works. Today, we're following the money to find the hidden creditors. And what we'll uncover is this. The planet's debt collector isn't a person, a country, or even a bank. It's the architecture of the currency itself. Let's start with the United States, because it's the clearest example of how this works. $36 trillion in debt. That's 121% of the entire US economy, more debt than the country produces in a year. And when people hear that number, they assume it's owed to foreign governments, China, Japan, oil-rich nations holding treasury bonds as leverage. But that's not how it works. Roughly 70% of US debt is owed to Americans themselves, not foreign powers, not shadowy creditors. The US government borrows from its own citizens, its own institutions, its own system. Here's the mechanism. The government collects tax revenue. Some of that revenue goes into programs like Social Security. Social Security is required by law to invest that surplus in US Treasury bonds. The government takes the cash and spends it today, leaving behind a promise to pay it back later. That trust fund everyone talks about, it's a filing cabinet in West Virginia filled with IOUs, one government department owing another. But it's not just Social Security. Pension funds hold trillions in treasury bonds. Insurance companies hold trillions more. Commercial banks, investment firms, mutual funds, they all park their reserves in government debt because it's considered the safest asset in the world. As of 2024, US commercial banks alone hold $1.8 trillion in treasury bonds. That's triple the entire GDP of Brazil. Pension funds have invested a quarter of their assets into bonds. Insurance companies, over 60%. This creates a hidden network. Banks, pension funds, insurance companies all connected through government debt. Your savings become loan money for the government. The government spends it. Then it pays interest back to those same institutions. They take that interest and buy more bonds. The cycle repeats, and those interest payments keep growing. Over the next decade alone, the US will spend $13.8 trillion just on interest. Not on infrastructure, not on schools, just on servicing old debt. That's more than the entire GDP of Japan. The fastest growing line item in the federal budget isn't defense or healthcare. It's interest on money already spent. And here's the uncomfortable part. This isn't unique to the United States. Every developed nation does this. Japan's government debt is 254% of GDP, and most of it is held domestically. The UK, France, Germany, they all run the same internal debt structure. The real question isn't who holds the bonds. The real question is, where does the money come from in the first place? The architects, how banks create money from nothing. There's a myth most people believe about how banks work. You deposit your paycheck, the bank holds it in a vault. When someone needs a loan, the bank lends out your money and charges interest. You get a small cut, the bank keeps the rest, and everyone moves on. That's not how it works. When a bank issues a loan, it doesn't lend out depositor savings. It creates new money, out of nothing. Here's the actual process. The government needs to borrow $1 billion. It issues a treasury bond. A bank agrees to buy it. But the bank doesn't have $1 billion sitting in a vault. It simply types $1 billion into a ledger. New currency enters circulation the moment the loan is signed. This is called fractional reserve banking, but even that term is misleading. Since 2020, banks don't have to keep any of your money in reserve. They create credit out of nothing, as long as they think they can manage the risk. When you take out a mortgage, the bank doesn't pull $300,000 from someone else's account. It creates $300,000 in new credit money. The moment you sign for the loan, the money is born. Your debt and the new money are created at the exact same time. Think about your own bank account for a second. You check the balance on your phone. You see a number. You assume that money is sitting there, waiting for you to withdraw it. It's not. The bank already lent it out. Your savings are funding someone else's mortgage, and that mortgage is funding a treasury bond, and that bond is funding a program that might not even exist by the time you retire. The money you think is yours has already been borrowed, repackaged, and cycled through the system multiple times over. You're not a saver. You're a creditor in a loop you didn't agree to join. This is why the world owes more than twice what it actually earns. There's $251 trillion in debt, but only $107 trillion in actual production. The debt isn't backed by wealth. The debt is what creates the money in the first place. Now here's where it gets mathematically impossible. When you borrow $300,000, the bank creates $300,000, but you owe back $300,000 plus interest. Let's say over 30 years, that's another $200,000 in interest payments. So you owe $500,000 total. But the bank only created $300,000. Where does the extra $200,000 come from? It doesn't exist. Not yet. Someone else has to borrow it into existence. Think of it like a game of musical chairs. But every round, the bank removes 2 chairs instead of 1. The players keep circulating, but there are never enough chairs for everyone to sit down. The system is built so that someone has to lose. That's the math problem. Someone else takes on new debt to create the money you need to pay your interest. Then they need someone else to borrow money so they can pay their interest. The music never stops. The chairs keep disappearing. And here's the speed problem. The system has to accelerate. More debt, more loans, more interest, faster circulation. Because if the borrowing slows down, the whole thing collapses. This is why paying off all debt is structurally impossible. If every loan were repaid tomorrow, the money supply would vanish. Currency only exists because debt exists. And this is why governments can never pay off the national debt. It's not a moral failing, it's a mathematical reality. Compound interest ensures the debt always exceeds the available money. Growth isn't optional in this system, it's mandatory. Because if the debt stops growing, the money supply contracts, and the economy collapses. The architects of this system aren't individual bankers making loans. The engineers are the central banks that set the rules, the regulations that allow credit creation, and the institutional framework that ensures the cycle never stops. But if the debt can never be repaid, what's the point? Who benefits from a perpetual motion machine that's mathematically designed to grow forever? The collectors. Who actually controls the system? The answer is institutions, not people, not elected governments. Institutions designed to operate outside democratic accountability. Let's look at the one building that actually runs your financial life. It's not the White House. It's not the Federal Reserve Building in Washington. It's a tower in Basel, Switzerland that most people have never heard of. The Bank for International Settlements, the BIS, the Central Bank for Central Banks. This institution operates with legal immunity in most jurisdictions. It doesn't publish minutes of its meetings, doesn't answer to voters, and you can't vote the leaders out. Every 2 months, the world's most powerful central bankers from 63 member countries meet there to coordinate the rules that govern your currency, setting the standards for capital requirements, liquidity ratios, and risk management that every major bank in the world follows. Below the BIS are the central banks themselves, the Federal Reserve, the European Central Bank, the Bank of Japan, the People's Bank of China. They control interest rates, manage currency supply, and act as lenders of last resort when the system wobbles. And below them are the international financial institutions, the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. These are the enforcers. When a country can't service its debt, the IMF steps in, not to forgive the debt, but to restructure it. And restructuring comes with conditions. This is where the closed loop becomes control. The debt isn't just money moving in circles, it's power circulating through institutions you can't vote out. Creditors don't want repayment, they want perpetual interest payments and policy control. And because the system operates outside democratic accountability, there's no mechanism to stop it. Rich countries like the US and Japan can keep borrowing forever. Because people trust them, their interest rates stay low. They just use new loans to pay off old ones. The cycle never stops, and they never face the bill. China sits in the middle of this divide. China holds $750 billion in US debt, but owes $18 trillion itself. How? The same circular mechanism. China's government borrows from its own state-owned banks to fund infrastructure projects. And here's the interconnected web. Those same Chinese banks that hold China's domestic debt also hold US Treasury bonds. They're creditors and debtors at the same time, in both directions. Those projects generate economic growth. That growth creates the revenue to pay interest on the debt. But the interest keeps compounding, so they borrow more to build more, to grow more. It's the same closed loop, just with state banks instead of private ones. China isn't escaping the system. It's running the system at maximum speed, hoping growth stays ahead of interest. And when growth slows, the trap tightens. But developing nations face a different reality. When they borrow, interest rates are higher. And here's the trap. They're often forced to borrow in foreign currencies, US dollars, euros, which means if their own currency weakens, the debt doesn't just stay the same. It explodes in local terms. A $1 billion loan becomes $2 billion overnight if your currency collapses. When a country can't pay, the IMF steps in with a loan. But there's a catch. They force the country to sell off its resources, cut public services, and lower the value of its own money. It's a bailout that comes with a massive bill. And here's where this stops being theoretical. Those same structural adjustments, cutting spending, devaluing currency, opening markets to foreign capital, they don't just happen in Sri Lanka or Zambia. The mechanism is identical in your economy. When governments print money to service debt, your grocery bill goes up. When they cut social programs to meet IMF conditions, your services disappear. The austerity forced on developing nations is the same force eating away at your purchasing power. Different speed, same direction. The debt becomes leverage, not for repayment, but for control. Sri Lanka defaulted in 2022. Pakistan is teetering on the edge. Zambia, Lebanon, Ghana, they're all trapped in the same cycle. Borrow to survive, struggle to repay. Restructure under conditions that transfer wealth and sovereignty to creditors. This is the terminal phase of the debt system, and the signals are everywhere. The US dollar, 3-year low. Gold, up 28% in 2025. Silver, 30-year high. JP Morgan's call, $4,000 gold by mid-2026. Goldman Sachs, confirmed. Bank of America, confirmed. The exit signs are flashing red, and the institutions are already running for the door. Institutions are moving out of debt instruments and into real assets. Not because they think the system will collapse tomorrow, but because they know the debt can't be repaid. The only way out is default by inflation. Governments won't say, we can't pay. They'll print until the debt becomes worthless. Your savings, your pension, your currency, they're all collateral in this system. The debt isn't owed to people. It's owed to the architecture itself. And the collectors aren't waiting for repayment. They're waiting for the inevitable reset. The planet's debt collector isn't a person or a country. It's the system that creates the currency. The money isn't owed to creditors. It's owed to the mechanism that generates it. Your savings are someone else's liability. Your mortgage is the bank's asset. The government's debt is your pension fund's investment. It's all one closed loop, expanding forever, because the alternative is collapse. And because your savings are just accounting entries in this debt system, not backed by gold, not secured by anything tangible, you are personally exposed to what comes next. Your pension, your bank balance, your currency, they're all tied to the same mechanism that created $300 trillion in unpayable debt. A debt that was never meant to be repaid. The reset isn't a crisis, it's the planned outcome. The architecture was designed this way, to expand until the only way forward is devaluation. The evacuation into real assets has already begun. The institutions that built this system are already through the door. The question is whether you see what's happening before it closes behind them.